Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm Mark, and today I want to talk about Alchemy. In particular, I want to talk about how if you are a competitive, free-to-play player, you should not be spending resources on Alchemy. You should not be using wildcards to create or to craft rares and mythic rares in the format. You shouldn't be playing, or you shouldn't be using resources to enter events that wins alchemy packs, or to open alchemy packs for that matter. So definitions first. What do I mean by free-to-play competitive player? So the free-to-play part is kind of straightforward, right? So free-to-play means that you do not spend any actual money in the game, right? Instead, you collect your daily gold, you build that gold, and then you use that either to buy packs in order to get the wild cards that will allow you to craft your decks, or you use them for draft, which is still the most efficient way to collect cards, as long as you know what you're doing. It's as long as your wild card, as long as your draft win rate is high enough. That's a story for another day. Right. So that's free to play. And what do I mean by competitive? So I'm framing competitive in the context of you want to use your resources as efficiently as possible because you want to have the best decks in the format, right? You want to have the best decks in the format for you to be able to play at events where there are relevant prizes, right? So if you want to, or if you make it a point to find the best decks, or to craft the best decks, or to make the best decks, right, in the format, and you're doing that because you want to be qualified for the Mythic qualifier, right? So that you'll have a chance to maybe play in a Mythic championship. Then that's what I mean by a competitive player, right? So you're playing because you have a goal. Whatever that goal is, it involves winning, right? Whatever that goal is, it involves winning. So you want to be able to, so put those together, free-to-play competitive player, you want to be able to spend your resources as efficiently as possible so that you will have access to the cards you need in order for you to achieve your competitive goals. So for example, I actually consider myself as almost a free-to-play player, certainly a competitive player. So I'm almost a free-to-play competitive player. I've only spent $105 in the game throughout my time playing it, and I've been playing this game for 3 years now. And as you can see, I have more than enough resources to do with as I wish in the game. Right? I have more than enough resources to do with as I wish in the game, and I use these resources for competitive endeavors. Like if there's an arena open, then that means that I can use how many gold I need in order to get that day 2 token. Because what else am I going to use the gold for, right? And actually that's what I did in the last open, the draft open, which was very enjoyable. I wasn't able to win money on day 2, but I was able to get to day 2 for free, essentially, since, it's just gold, and now I'm nearing 1,000,000 gold again. So how about Alchemy? So what is Alchemy? Well, we know what Alchemy is already, right? It's a new format in Magic Arena where you have the same standard cards, like it shares a card pool with standard, except that it has new cards, right? It has arena-only cards that function. These cards function in ways that are very difficult to implement on paper. So they are what are called arena-only cards. You will only see them on Magic Arena. And number 2, we have nerfs. So in this format, they nerf the cards that are considered to be too powerful, in their current versions in standard. So in Alchemy, instead of using the cards as they are in standard, you use nerfed versions of these cards. But we all know this. So now that we've made those definitions, why am I saying that if you fit the definition of a free-to-play competitive player, that you should not use your resources, your precious gold and gems, to spend on, and wildcards for that matter, which is the most important resource in constructed in the game, why should you not use those resources to craft alchemy only cards? Why shouldn't you do that? Right. So at the core of this argument is the difference between banning cards and nerfing cards. And if you've been playing Magic for long enough, you know that banning cards is a fixture of the game, where if the meta becomes too problematic, right? If it becomes too problematic, if there is one deck, for example, or two decks that's dominating the entire meta and people can't play anything else competitively because these decks are just too powerful, then Wizards bans cards, right? Wizard bans cards. And what happens when Wizards bans cards is that, of course, the meta will sort of reset, right? So people are going to start thinking about, so if this card gets banned, how does the meta shift? Sometimes it's just the next most powerful deck that takes the place as the next bannable deck, and that has happened. But also it's also possible for the meta to adjust and for there to be actually more viable decks than before, and that's when we kind of say that the ban fixed stuff, right? So nerfing actually does the same thing, right? If you nerf a card, then you nerf it to a point where it no longer becomes very good in the deck where it was previously very good. And what happens is that that deck also becomes not so good anymore. So take, for example, the many cards that were nerfed in Alchemy. Many of those cards and the decks that they were attached to no longer see very much play. Right? You don't see as many mono-white decks in Alchemy. You don't see as many blue-red turns decks. So if banning a card and nerfing a card have the same impact on the meta, what's the problem? The problem is that the bar is set much higher for when you ban a card than it is for when you nerf a card. And the evidence for this is kind of obvious, right? If the cards that were nerfed in Alchemy really deserved to be banned, then they would have been banned in Standard, right? And if you look at the data, on the win rates of many of these decks, the win rates are not really that oppressive. And in fact, one can make a very good argument that the standard meta at the moment is actually quite healthy. Of course, there are winning decks, right? And these are the winning decks that use Goldspan Dragon, decks that use Alrund's Epiphany, decks that use Eska's Chariot, decks that use Luminarch Aspirant. So we can be quite confident that whatever is the rate that Wizards was banning things in Standard, the rate at which they will be nerfing things will be higher. And more importantly, the basis for nerfing is fuzzy. Right? The basis for nerfing is fuzzy because we have all of these new cards in Alchemy, right? Some very powerful cards. So what happens when these cards become more represented on the ladder, when decks having these cards become more represented on the Alchemy ladder? At some point, some decks will always emerge as the best decks. That's the nature of the game. But what becomes the criteria for nerfing cards? Right? Is it if they get a 10% meta share? Is it if they get a 20% meta share? We don't know. But certainly, it's going to be a lower criteria than it is for banning cards. Otherwise, like, what's the point? At the same time, we know that if a card deserves to be banned, it will still be banned in standard, right? But it will not be banned in Alchemy. Most likely, it's going to be nerfed in Alchemy, since they can do that in Alchemy. So because of this increased frequency, anticipated increased frequency of nerfing, and because nerfing will have the same impact as banning, at least in as far as competitive decks are concerned, what will happen is that there is much greater uncertainty in the Alchemy format than there is in the standard format. And so if you are a competitive free-to-play player, what's important, one of the things that's important to you is getting the most mileage out of your cards, right? So if you build this deck, you spend these wild cards, you know that this deck is good. You want to practice with that deck, to be very good with that deck, so that when you join this tournament that you're planning to join in 2 weeks, you will have the best chances of doing well. But what if there's a nerf a day before that tournament, a week before that tournament, right? We don't know the frequency of the nerfs, but we know that it's going to be more frequent than bans. So it's very possible for you to suddenly lose your deck a day before your tournament, a week before your tournament, and suddenly you don't know what to play. So that means that you stand to waste a lot of effort in Alchemy and a lot of resources in Alchemy by using wildcards to build decks that may become invalid by the time you get to the tournament that you want to use those decks for. What adds to this issue is how wildcard reimbursement will be treated in this new in Alchemy, in this new setup. Of course, when a card gets banned in standard, you will still get wildcards for them. It will still get wildcards back for them, even if in Alchemy they're just going to be nerfed, right? So they can ban a card in standard, you'll get wildcards for them, but you'll still be able to play them in Alchemy. The problem is when they nerf things in Alchemy, right? We know that there are Alchemy only cards, and we know that these are very powerful cards that could drive the meta. In fact, some of them are already driving the meta. So it's very tempting to craft these because these are very powerful cards. But these don't need to be banned, right? In fact, there's no logical reason for WotC to ban these cards when they can nerf them. So what's going to happen is they're going to nerf these cards at some point if the meta becomes too revolved around these cards, and we don't know to what extent it requires for them to be able to nerf, for them to decide to nerf these cards. But when they do, right? When they do, they won't give you wild cards back for them, right? Because they're not getting banned, they're just getting nerfed. And that's a problem because, or that adds to the problem, because used to be you can get at least some wild cards back to help you in building your next deck, right? But in this case, that won't be, and that's just going to add to the strain on the resources that you have, your wildcard resources, your gold resources, making it even more difficult for you to adjust to a nerfing in the Alchemy meta. Another issue is that if you are a competitive free-to-play player and you are trying to prepare for an event, what the meta you are seeing right now on the Alchemy ladder, whether in best of 1 or in best of 3, may be very different from the true meta that would emerge. Suppose that the best decks in the format have been fleshed out. And the reason for that is that there aren't really any regular competitive events in this format. That's a problem that it shares with Historic. And it's even worse here because we do not have like even because it's so new, right? The format is so new, so we don't even have the number of sort of competitive events, though not really, that we have in Historic in Alchemy, right? So the data is even flimsier. So you may convince yourself that this deck is good, but really when it comes down to that actual competitive event where people with much more resources than you have been testing and playing the format, you may be surprised at what the actual competitive decks turn out to be. So am I saying don't play Alchemy? No, certainly not. I mean, it's an interesting format, and you did get a lot of free packs, right? We all got a lot of free packs, so maybe we got lucky. Maybe you got lucky and got some of the cards that are making an impact in the format from those free packs. So you should play those. What I'm saying is that if it becomes a resource choice, right? If it becomes a choice of, is it worth it for me to use these wild cards now to test these cards in Alchemy so that I'll be prepared for, say, the Alchemy Mythic Qualifier, which is, I think, happening in January, right? My answer to that is no, right? My answer to that is no. Like, you may end up, like, not only would you possibly regret spending those wild cards just because the card turns out to be not so good, but now even if the card turns out to be fantastic, you may end up regretting it down the line anyway because it's going to get nerfed. And like I said, of course, banning is the same impact as nerfing as far as how it affects your deck is concerned. But the chances of a good card getting nerfed is much higher than the chances of that same good card getting banned, right? Especially if it's in Alchemy and it's an Alchemy only card, where there's practically zero chance that it's going to get banned. It's going to get nerfed. You're not going to get your wild cards back. And you're not going to get to play that awesome deck in the event that you want to play it at. Right. So that's it for me. Let me know what you think about this argument. And let me know what other things you want me to talk about in the channel. And of course, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the channel and like this video and hit that bell so that you'll be notified when I make some new content. All right, thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time.